The old trail road leading toward the small timber town looked worn, lonely and covered by wind-blown dust that never seemed to settle. Riders passed now and then. Wagons creaked through with cattle feed, hay, and flour. But on that late afternoon, when the sun leaned low and the air smelled like pine wood and fresh-turned earth, a quiet story began forming around a young woman who sat in the back of a slow-moving wagon. She held her hands close to her chest, eyes lowered, letting her hair fall forward like a shield. Folks around her whispered she could not hear nor speak, and because of that, no family wanted to claim her. No household felt ready to take care of her needs, and no soul believed she could ever make a place for herself in a world that judged anything different. No one knew her mind was crystal clear and sharp as a winter star, and her heart carried words she could not show openly. Words she understood better than many who could hear. She had been brought to town with a small group headed toward the trading post where notices hung for workers, cooks, mail-order brides, field helpers, and charity placements. A local officer rode ahead, saying she could be given to anyone willing to offer shelter and honest intention. Whispers followed. Some people stared with pity, others with confusion, and a few smirked as if her life meant very little. The young woman kept her gaze lowered, but every word carried by air somehow found its way to her thoughts, even if no one believed she could understand. She had learned from years of struggle that a quiet mind could hear more than spoken words. She studied faces. She read lips. She sensed tone and truth from shoulders, jaws, and hands. That was how she tasted the world. Even if the world refused to taste her heart. In that same dusty town lived a ranch owner who never feared silence. He was known as a man who worked alone and trusted more in horses, storms, and prairie grass than the laughter of strangers. People whispered he had once tried building a life with someone, but something had happened that made him guard his heart like a cabin door on a windy night. He walked with purpose, kept his hat lowered, and spent most evenings on his porch with a cup of hot brew in hand, staring at faraway hills like he was waiting for a story that never came. He was not mean nor cruel, only guarded and heavy with past scars that left him believing he was better off watching life from a distance. That day, when townsfolk gathered around the wagon, he noticed the young woman sitting still as lake water under morning fog. Her clothes were worn, her shoes thin, yet her posture carried a quiet strength. The officer read out a small paper stating she could not hear nor talk and needed a home. Some stepped back. Others looked away. One old woman murmured that it would be too strange, too much trouble, and too heavy for simple life. Rumors flew lightly, calling her a burden, calling her useless, calling her better off placed in some church home where no one had to try. The ranch owner understood the sting of labels. He had tasted it himself once when people decided his silence made him cold and uncaring. He looked longer at the girl, not with pity or fear, but with a strange pull he could not explain. Someone asked the officer if she understood anything they were saying. He waved his hand casually, saying she only stared and nothing more. The young woman kept her face lowered, though her fingers trembled slightly. She understood every word, and every careless remark pressed into her like small hidden thorns. She wanted to speak, yet she had learned long ago that some truths could not be poured out to strangers. Instead, she held her breath, wondering if this day would end like all others, with someone turning away and leaving her behind. The ranch owner stepped forward then, not loudly or dramatically, but with the steady footstep of a man who thought carefully before moving. He asked what would be required to claim responsibility for her. The officer seemed surprised, almost relieved that someone even asked. He said there would be a small payment for transfer papers, food confirmation, and signature. The ranch owner nodded without hesitation, removed his worn leather pouch, and paid the cost. People stared as if he had lost his sense. Some muttered that it made no sense for a single ranchman to take in a woman who could not hear or speak. A few snickered, predicting nothing good would come of it. The officer handed the girl her small bundle of belongings and guided her toward the tall man with dusty boots and steady hands. The young woman lifted her face for a single moment. Their eyes met, and although she did not say a word, something unspoken crossed between them like a small flame deciding to stay alive, The walk toward his ranch was long, slow, and wrapped in silence that was not uncomfortable. He rode his horse while she sat behind him, holding onto the saddle strap rather than his coat. The wind brushed their faces, the sky glowed faint gold, and distant coyotes called somewhere from the valley. When they reached a small creek crossing, he slowed down. He wondered if she felt fear, uncertainty, or regret. She studied his shoulders, noticing he never shifted away nor acted nervous, as if silence felt natural around him. Everything about him seemed measured and honest. She wondered why he stepped forward when no one else did. She wondered if she would truly be safe, or if this new road would end in more hurt upon reaching his land. She saw a quiet ranch with well-built fences, neat barns, and a small wooden cabin that looked weathered but welcoming. He helped her off the horse with gentle care, making sure she stood firmly before stepping back to avoid making her uncomfortable. He motioned toward the porch to show her she could go inside. She hesitated, not sure if she belonged. He noticed, paused, and gently nodded, telling her she was welcome without needing to speak. When she entered, she found simple furniture, warm blankets, and a scent of homemade broth still resting in the air. Something about that cabin felt safer than any place she had known for a very long time. He brought her a slate board and chalk, offering it for communication. She blinked with surprise because most people never thought of giving her a way to respond. She held the chalk but paused, wondering if revealing her understanding too soon would bring trouble, suspicion, or disappointment. Life had taught her that being misunderstood was often safer than being truly seen. She placed the chalk down gently and acted unsure. He thought she maybe felt shy or frightened and did not push her. He only pointed toward a small room with a bed where she could rest. She thanked him silently through her eyes, and he seemed to understand that small gesture as clearly as spoken words. Late that night, when the moonlight touched the window and the air turned cool, the young woman lay awake listening to every sound the night carried. She could hear distant wolves, the rustle of dry grass, the creak of wood, and the slow footsteps of the ranch owner outside the cabin. Her heart felt strange, caught between hope and fear. She wondered what kind of man he truly was, and if she had finally found a place where she would not be tossed or ignored. She traced letters with her finger on the blanket, practicing the truth she could speak if she ever dared at that same moment outside. The ranch owner leaned against a porch post, staring into the night. He felt a quiet pull in his chest, something he had not felt in many years. He told himself he had done it out of simple kindness, but deep inside he knew there was something else forming, something he could not yet name. He wondered who she was behind those calm eyes. He wondered what she felt, what she feared, and what she might be hiding. The wind carried his questions toward the cabin, but he did not know that she heard every silent one by morning. Everything inside that small wooden home would begin shifting, and the truth she guarded would no longer stay hidden forever. He believed he brought home a quiet soul who lived locked away from the world, but he had no idea she carried a secret that would change both of their lives. And nothing about her silence was what it seemed. The rooster crowed long before the first light touched the sky, and the young woman opened her eyes slowly, unsure if she had slept at all. Her mind felt full, heavy with questions and memories that never stopped moving. The ranch house was quiet except for the sound of a kettle heating over the small stove. She stepped out of the bed, feeling the wooden floor cool under her bare feet, and she looked toward the window where gray morning light slowly stretched across the plains. She brushed her long hair back and fixed the wrinkled clothes on her body with careful fingers. This house felt different, not cold or crowded, but also not fully safe yet. She wanted to learn what kind of place she had been brought into, and what kind of man had chosen her when no one else did. He stepped inside moments later from the small barn, his boots carrying traces of fresh mud, and set a metal pail near the stove. He greeted her with a small nod, calm and simple, as if he did not expect anything more than her presence. She lowered her gaze respectfully, still unsure how to behave around him. He motioned with his hand, inviting her to sit at the small table while he poured hot drink into 2 wooden cups. She hesitated before sitting, unsure if she should show gratitude or wait for instructions. He placed the cup in front of her without speaking, not forcing her to drink, only offering. She warmed her hands around the cup and breathed in the faint earthy scent. Feeling a strange warmth that was not only from the drink, he studied her carefully. Not like others did with judgment or pity, but with interest that held no sharp edge. Still, he wondered how much she truly understood. He considered writing something on the slate again, but he paused, thinking it might frighten her. She could feel the weight of his thoughts, and for a moment, she almost wrote a single word to show him she was not lost in silence, but fear stopped her hand. She did not know if revealing her truth would make him regret his choice, and she could not risk losing the first place that felt almost steady beneath her feet. After breakfast, he led her outside to show the ranch work. The air was crisp, and the scent of hay, soil, and horses mixed together. She watched as he pointed toward different things, explaining with gestures how life on the ranch worked. He showed her where the water well stood, where the animals were fed, where the tools were stored, and how the fence line needed regular checking. She followed with quiet attention, memorizing every detail. She noticed how he always kept a small distance so she would not feel trapped. She noticed, too, how he never looked at her with fear, only curiosity. When they reached the far pasture, she saw the wide land that stretched like a painted world no one had touched. She closed her eyes for a moment, hearing every whisper of wind, every flap of bird wings, and every rustle of grass. She felt a strange ache in her chest, the kind that comes from remembering what it feels like to be free and caged at the same time. He watched her silently, noticing how she seemed to feel the land more than most people who walked it daily. He wondered what her life had been before the wagon brought her here, what pain shaped that quiet strength, and what story she carried inside those calm eyes. They returned to the house by midday, and he brought her a small set of folded clothes he found stored away from years ago. She accepted them with a gentle nod and placed her hand over her heart for a moment, a gesture she used when words were too risky. He understood just enough to offer a faint smile before turning away, giving her privacy inside her room. She opened the folded clothes and ran her fingertips across the fabric. They were simple but clean, smelling faintly of wood and pine. She changed quietly and looked at herself in the small mirror hanging near the bed. She saw a girl who looked stronger than she felt, a girl who remembered everything people said, even when they assumed she knew nothing. She pressed her palm gently against the mirror and whispered inside her mind a promise she did not know if she could keep. That one day she would speak her truth to someone worthy, later. When she stepped outside again, she noticed his horse saddled and ready. He pointed toward town, letting her know he needed supplies. She nodded to show she understood, though he still was not sure how much she caught. He hesitated before leaving, looking at her with a thoughtful expression, as if considering if he should leave her alone or ask her to ride with him. She stepped back slightly, hoping he would go without questioning her. He respected the silent request and mounted his horse without pressure, riding away with steady rhythm, leaving dust floating behind him. As soon as he disappeared into the distance, she stepped onto the porch and sat down slowly. She gazed across the meadows, trying to settle her nerves. The ranch was silent but not frightening. She traced shapes on the wood railing with her fingertip, thinking about the wagon, the strangers, and how close she came to being sent somewhere she might never escape. She remembered faces from her past, harsh hands, people who assumed quiet meant empty. She recalled the first moment she realized she could understand language even when no one believed she could. She had learned to watch, not just listen. She had learned to catch meaning in breath, expression, and tone. She wondered when and how to reveal that she was not deaf. She feared that revealing it might bring more questions than safety. While she sat lost in her thoughts, a wagon rattled near the fence and two local girls stood on the back pointing toward the ranch. One whispered that the man had taken home the silent girl from the wagon like she was an unwanted animal. The other laughed softly, wondering what he planned to do with someone who could not hear and had no voice. The young woman felt her throat tighten. She stayed hidden behind the porch post, not wanting to draw attention. The girls soon left, but their careless words stayed behind like sharp seeds, taking root. An hour passed before she stood and began walking the yard, feeling drawn to understand every inch of the land. She touched the fence, the barn door, the water trough, and the corral. She studied tools and equipment, learning silently just in case she would need to prove her worth. She sensed that the man who brought her here was not cruel, but she knew people could change when they felt disappointed or misled. She needed to show usefulness, even if she could not reveal her full truth yet. When he returned at sunset, he carried a small cloth bag with food and supplies. She met him halfway, gently taking the bag from his hands before he could ask. He paused, surprised by her initiative, and nodded with approval. She placed the bag inside and arranged everything neatly on the shelf. He watched her thoughtfulness, impressed by how she handled everything with care. He tried writing a short message on the slate again, asking if she liked the ranch, but once more she pretended not to understand. She did not want to speak through chalk when she feared revealing too much. Days passed this way, each one building a fragile trust neither of them discussed. She helped with small chores, cleaned the cabin, fed the chickens, swept the porch, and watched him repair fences and carry hay. There was an unspoken rhythm between them, almost like two quiet souls walking alongside each other without stepping into shadows they were not ready to share. One evening, a strong wind rolled across the land, carrying the smell of distant rain. The ranch owner stood near the barn, tightening ropes and checking the roof. The young woman approached with a lantern in hand, her eyes scanning the darkening sky with concern. Thunder sounded far away, low and heavy. The man looked at her, seeing fear flash briefly in her eyes, as if storms were not just storms to her. He raised a hand slowly, not to silence but to reassure. She felt warmth in that simple gesture, something she could almost trust. They hurried inside when the first drops fell, and the storm pressed against the walls like restless fists. The wind howled, windows shook, and the roof groaned. She sat near the fireplace, hugging her knees, remembering another storm long ago that had changed her life. He noticed her trembling and placed a blanket near her, not forcing, only offering. She took it gently, her hands shaking too much to hide it. He stared into the fire for a long time before speaking quietly, not sure if she would understand. He said sometimes silence made life heavier, and he knew what it felt like to carry things alone. She looked up, surprised by his tone. No one had ever spoken to her like that without needing anything in return. She felt her heart pull in two directions, one urging her to reveal everything, the other warning her that truth could cost her everything she finally had. The firelight flickered across her face, and he wondered again who she truly was. Something in her gaze held more knowledge than a silent life should allow. Something about the way her hands moved and her eyes followed every detail told him she was not lost to silence the way others claimed. Outside, thunder rolled louder, rattling the cabin just enough to make both of them turn toward the window. Neither spoke, but both felt a change rising in the space between them, a change that could build trust or break it apart, and before the storm cleared, there would be something discovered in that cabin, something he never expected, and something she feared more than loneliness itself. The storm lingered through most of the night, and though the young woman finally fell asleep near the fire, her rest was uneasy. Shadows in her dreams moved like echoes of things she had tried to forget, and when she woke before dawn, her heart still beat fast. She looked around the cabin, remembering where she was, and saw the ranch owner asleep in his chair with his hat still on, head slightly tilted, as if he had tried to stay awake to make sure no danger crept in. She watched him quietly, noticing how his face looked calmer when sleeping, not guarded or distant like most days. She wondered what kind of hurt lay in his past, and if he also feared what truth could do. By morning, the air felt washed clean, and the world outside glowed with soft dew. He woke slowly, rubbing his eyes, and saw her already standing near the window. He gave her a gentle nod as greeting, then stretched his stiff shoulders. She returned a soft nod and wrapped the blanket neatly before placing it aside. There was no need for spoken words to show respect, and he appreciated that more than she knew. After breakfast, he took her outside to inspect the damage left by the rain. Several fence boards had fallen loose, and parts of the roof near the barn needed repair. He walked ahead with tools in hand, and she followed, determined to help even if he did not ask. She held the nails, the hammer, and small boards, passing them along without needing instruction. He watched her for a moment, surprised by how quickly she understood where to stand and what to offer. Most people he had worked with struggled to match his pace, yet she moved like she had lived around hard work all her life. When they finished one section, he climbed the barn ladder to reach the roof. Before handing him the next tool, she looked around and noticed two men on horseback near the far path, staring in their direction. One pointed with his chin, whispering to the other. She felt her stomach tighten. She lowered her gaze, hoping they would ride away. But instead they turned toward the ranch with slow, curious steps. The ranch owner finished hammering and climbed down just as the two men reached the front gate. They greeted him loudly as if trying to get her attention on purpose. They spoke about hearing news in town that he had taken in the silent girl no one wanted, and they asked if that rumor was true. He nodded with a short answer, not liking their tone. One man smirked and asked if he was planning to keep her as help, or if there was another reason. The young woman stood very still, her hands locked together. She heard every mocking note in their voices, every hidden meaning beneath their words. He told them calmly that she lived there now and that there was no need for town gossip. The men shared a knowing look, then leaned forward slightly, asking if he was sure she could not hear. They wondered if she might hear things he didn't want others to know. He stared at them, his expression changing into something firm. He told them she was safe here and did not need questions. Still, the men dragged the conversation, hinting that strange things tended to happen around people with unclear stories. Finally, seeing he would not entertain them, they turned their horses and rode off, promising to return for a friendly drink. Though their voices suggested anything but friendliness, the moment they disappeared over the hill, the young woman felt the tension drop from her shoulders. The ranch owner glanced at her and noticed the way she had pressed her fingertips together in a nervous pattern. He wondered what had frightened her more, the men or their harsh curiosity. He wanted to reassure her but struggled to find the right action that would not overwhelm her. Instead, he gently motioned to continue repairs, and she followed. Grateful for the distraction. As days passed, the routine became steadier, yet small things began revealing parts of their hidden lives. She noticed how he rode out early on certain mornings and returned with supplies that did not always match his ranch work, things like old letters, small boxes, or cloth-wrapped items. He never explained and she never asked, but she sensed he carried unfinished business with someone from his past. At night, when he thought she slept, he sometimes sat near the fire reading one specific letter that looked worn and creased. His jaw tightened every time he looked at it, and his hand closed into a slow fist before folding it away again. Meanwhile, she carried her own secret quietly. She kept practicing words silently with her lips when he could not see, trying to remember how her voice once sounded before fear silenced it for good. She thought about telling him she could understand, but each time she imagined his face turning cold or angry, thinking she tricked him. Trust was fragile, and she could not risk breaking it. One afternoon, he asked her with gestures if she wanted to learn some ranch tasks, such as feeding cattle or brushing the horses. She nodded eagerly, and he brought her to the stable, where a calm brown horse stood with patient eyes. She slowly approached, using slow, gentle movements the way she had seen him do. The horse lowered its head, accepting her presence, and he smiled faintly, realizing that the animals trusted her faster than most people trusted strangers. Something about her carried honesty even without words. While brushing the horse, she felt a memory rise from deep inside. She saw an old cabin from her childhood, a woman brushing a horse and teaching her to move slow, calm, and focused. She felt a lump in her throat, and her hand froze halfway. The ranch owner noticed and placed his hand gently on the horse's rope, waiting for her to settle. She blinked the memory away, returning to her quiet work. He did not ask, but he stored that moment in his thoughts, building a silent picture of her past piece by piece. A few days later, the same two men from town came back, but this time they carried bottles. Loud laughter and unfriendly smiles. The ranch owner walked to meet them before they reached the porch. They pretended they wanted to catch up, but their eyes kept shifting toward the young woman. They told him they were curious if she understood anything and wanted to test it for fun. He stepped closer, blocking their view of her, and firmly said no. The men exchanged looks again, then asked where she came from, who her family was, and why she had been on the wagon. The ranch owner said it was not their business, and his tone sharpened enough that they slowly pulled back, but not before one of them said problems often follow those who hide truths after they left. He noticed her standing near the water well, holding a wooden bucket tightly. Her eyes stayed lowered, but her breath shook. He stepped closer, and she almost dropped the bucket. He placed a calm hand near the rope, not touching her, only steadying the moment. She slowly looked up, and he saw fear hidden in her gaze that was not caused by the storm outside or loud men, but something older, deeper, and harder to name. That night, she finally wrote one word on the slate while he was preparing wood for the fire. She handed it to him with trembling hands. The word said, "Please." He read it and looked at her with confused concern, waiting for more. She took the chalk again, trying to write another word, but her hand shook too much and she erased it quickly. He did not push. Instead, he placed the slate down and nodded, letting her know he would wait as long as she needed. But tension began building from that moment, both inside the cabin and beyond it. The two men from town were not the only ones curious. Some women at the trading post began whispering stories, some kind and some cruel. They wondered if she was dangerous, if she carried strange habits, or if she only pretended not to hear. Rumors traveled fast, and soon even the officer who had delivered her began hinting that he might need to check if she was adjusting well, hinting that some people needed supervision when their stories were not clear. The ranch owner felt the pressure grow, slowly around them like weeds tightening around a fence post. He did not regret taking her home, but he could not ignore how easily judgment spread. He watched her worried eyes and decided he would protect her even if he did not yet know from what. He sensed that revealing her truth would not be simple, and, if not done carefully, it could break everything inside her heart. She wished she could speak one sentence that explained everything, but fear remained stronger than hope. She wondered if she should leave before trouble found them both, but she did not know where she would go or if she would survive alone. She wished she could trust him with the truth, but her memories reminded her trust came with a price. Far from over. The story between them had only begun, and somewhere beyond the hills, another piece of her past waited to return, carrying the very secret she fought to keep buried. Morning fog settled low across the ranch, wrapping the land in a pale veil that made everything look uncertain. The young woman woke with a knot in her chest, knowing the calm days were beginning to slip away. She felt it in the way the ranch owner watched the horizon more often than before, in the way strangers passed by with slower eyes, and in the shift of wind that carried talk she wished she could silence. She had survived her life by hiding, but she was beginning to learn that hiding also built walls that trapped the heart. Still, she feared what would happen if the wall fell. She prepared breakfast quietly while he stepped outside to check the corral. When he returned, he leaned against the table as if debating whether to speak or stay silent. She sensed the weight of his thoughts and lowered her gaze, waiting. He wanted to ask about her past, about what frightened her, and what she was trying to write that night with the word please, but he feared pushing her. He knew enough about scars to understand they never healed by force. Instead, he tapped the table twice, signaling that he would be working farther from the cabin that day, near the riverbend fence line. She nodded, and he left with his rope and tools, giving her hours of stillness. As soon as he disappeared behind the trees, she released a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She wished she could trust him fully, yet pieces of her past clung to her like burrs on wool. She stepped outside and swept the porch slowly, finding peace in the steady rhythm of motion. She paused when she noticed something unusual near the gate, boot prints that did not belong to the ranch owner. She knelt down, touching the dry soil and following the partial trail a few steps until it faded. Her heart tightened, and she scanned the empty land. Nothing moved, but she knew someone had been close enough to watch. Later that afternoon, while she hung clothing on a rope behind the cabin, she heard hooves near the wooded edge. She froze, peeking around the corner. Two figures sat on horseback, not moving, studying the ranch as if measuring it. Sun glare hid their expressions, but she recognized the shape of one rider, the same man who had mocked her during the first visit. The other figure was new, broader-shouldered, with a cold posture that sent a chill through her. They remained still for a long moment, then disappeared back into the trees without a word. When the ranch owner returned at sundown, he noticed her unease even before she looked at him. She tried to act normal, but her eyes betrayed her fear. He gently motioned for her to show him where, and she led him behind the cabin to the spot where she saw the riders. He scanned the tree line, jaw tightening. Something unspoken connected between them. Trouble was coming. And it was coming for her. That night, the wind was quiet, yet she found no rest. Unable to sleep, she sat near the fire and traced letters on the slate carefully. Not to speak to him yet, but to remind herself she still carried a voice inside. She wrote small things: safe, fear, trust, and stay. She stared at those 4 words, each one holding its own battle. She wiped the slate clean before dawn, not ready to share. Though she wished she was, the following day brought another strange sign. A small folded note was pinned under a rock by the front path. She found it while gathering chopped wood. Her fingers shook as she opened it. The writing was messy, but the message was clear. It said she did not belong there, that lies never remained hidden forever, and that someone knew the truth she was hiding. She stared so long that her eyes blurred. Then she quickly hid the note under her clothes. Terrified he might think she had done something wrong, she wanted to tell him but could not. She feared that once he knew she could hear and understand, he might believe she sat quietly to manipulate him or gain advantage. She feared losing the first place that felt like home. She decided she would try proving herself through actions until her truth could be spoken. Without breaking what little trust they shared, days continued, but tension grew like clouds gathering before a storm. She worked harder, hoping effort could silence doubt. She cleaned the barn, organized tools, and cooked meals with care. He noticed and grew even more protective, often riding toward town and returning with information he did not share. Though his eyes warned that he did not like what he heard, one evening, just before dusk, the officer who had delivered her to the ranch arrived on horseback. She felt panic rise when she saw him. He dismounted and greeted the ranch owner in a strangely official tone. He explained that some people in town believed they should check on her well-being to ensure she was not mistreated or frightened. His voice, though polite, carried suspicion. The ranch owner answered firmly, saying she was safe and cared for, and that no one needed to interfere. The officer studied the young woman's face carefully, then said if she ever needed help she must signal him, though he spoke in a tone that implied she could not understand. When he left, she felt torn inside. She appreciated concern, but she wanted her home to remain undisturbed. As the officer rode away, the ranch owner faced her slowly. He studied her with deeper thought than ever before, as if he was beginning to see patterns that no longer matched what the town believed. He stepped closer and lifted the slate from the table, placing it in her hands. His eyes were gentle but serious. He motioned once more to write anything she wanted him to understand. She stared at the board, hands trembling, but fear locked her voice inside. She lowered her head, returning the slate with no marks. He accepted it without anger, but the silence between them grew heavier than before. That night, while he slept, she stayed awake and looked around the quiet cabin, realizing how much she had begun to love the peace it offered. She wished she could speak, not to defend herself, but to protect him. She knew she was not the only target. The men who watched from the trees were not driven by innocent curiosity. They wanted something, and she feared they believed she carried a secret worth taking. Her fear proved true the next morning, when the ranch owner prepared to ride into town. She felt panic rise and reached out slightly, trying to warn him, but no sound escaped. He paused, noticing her desperate expression, and reassured her he would return before sundown. She stepped back slowly, but the dread in her chest did not ease. Hours passed, and when the sun began dropping behind the hills, she stood near the gate waiting. He did not come. The air felt too still, too quiet. Her heartbeat grew faster. She walked to the barn, then the porch, then the road, hoping to see his figure riding toward home. Each minute felt like a tightening rope around her chest. At twilight, she finally saw movement down the road. But instead of one rider, she saw two horses approach. The same men who had visited before. They stopped near the gate and smirked at her as if enjoying her fear. One of them asked if she had finally found her voice or if she still planned to play the silent role forever. She backed away, her pulse racing, but they pushed their horses forward. Refusing to let her reach the door, they told her plainly that they had seen the ranch owner in town talking to people about protecting her and that it was time for answers. They demanded to know the truth, who she was, where she came from, and what she heard. She shook her head fast, not to deny but to refuse being forced. They grew angry, suggesting she was a danger because secrets rarely stayed quiet without reason. Suddenly, the sound of hooves thundered from behind the hill. The ranch owner returned faster than she ever imagined, his face filled with alarm. The men turned sharply, but they did not retreat fully. They yelled that the truth would come out soon, with or without him. They warned that more people were starting to ask questions. Then they finally rode off into the darkness. The ranch owner leapt off his horse and reached her side, placing a steadying hand near her shoulder, not grabbing her, only offering safety. She finally broke, tears filling her eyes, not from fear alone but from carrying too many unsaid truths for too long. She wanted to speak, wanted to tell him everything. But the words still trapped themselves. He stepped back slowly, his eyes no longer questioning if she understood, but realizing that she had understood everything from the beginning. And now he needed an answer not because of doubt, but to protect them both. The story now stood at the edge of change. Her secret could no longer remain hidden, and his past could not remain untouched. The next decision would change the course of their futures, and the truth that had waited in shadows was finally ready to step into the open. The night air felt heavier than any storm, and the young woman stood there trembling. Not because she did not trust the ranch owner, but because she feared the moment she had been running from was finally here. He stepped back only to give her space, his eyes soft, patient, and steady. He did not raise his voice or demand answers. He simply waited, and that gentle silence reached her heart stronger than any threat ever had. She pressed her hands against her chest, swallowed her fear, and slowly walked toward the small table where the slate rested. Her fingers trembled as she lifted it, and for the first time she did not hold the chalk with hesitation. She wrote slowly, carefully, wiping her tears only when they blurred the chalk. When she handed the slate to him, her breath trembled, but her gaze stayed firm. The message said that she could hear everything all along and that she was not born silent at all. She wrote that fear had taken her voice, not nature, and that she did not lie to hurt anyone. She admitted she was afraid of being harmed, pushed away, used, or traded like something without meaning. She explained she had learned to pretend silence to stay safe in places where speaking made her more vulnerable. She finished by writing one more short line. "Thank you for giving me peace." He read every word slowly, not once looking up until he understood the depth behind each line. When he finally raised his gaze, his eyes did not show anger, only sadness for what she must have lived through. He reached for the slate gently, placed it aside, and took a small step closer, raising both hands slowly to show calm. Then he spoke in a voice that felt like quiet shelter. He said she did not owe him fear, and she did not owe anyone silence. He told her the ranch was her home as long as she wanted it, and that she had never needed to earn that through pretending. She covered her mouth with both hands as tears rolled, and though no sound left her lips, a small sound rose inside her heart that she had not felt in years. He told her he would help her find her voice again, not to satisfy curiosity or prove anything to others, but so she could live without hiding who she truly was. She nodded slowly, and he gently rested his hand near her back, guiding her to sit by the warm fire. That night, instead of avoiding questions, they shared small truths in gestures and written words. She wrote about a foster family that treated her like a burden and people who gave her tasks but never kindness. She shared how she learned to read lips and how she slept near doors to escape if danger came. He then shared his story too. He told her he once loved someone but lost her to illness, leaving him with silence that felt safer than new beginnings. She listened with gentle eyes, Realizing their wounds came from different paths but led to the same lonely place, the next morning brought bright, calm skies. And though fear had not vanished, it no longer held chains. She practiced small sounds while he worked beside her. At first her voice shook like a weak flame, barely forming shape. But he did not let doubt enter. He spoke slow words near her, helped her shape breath, and smiled with every tiny improvement. She learned to say yes and water in small shy tone, and each sound made her eyes shine with pride that she had forgotten she could feel. Meanwhile, the men who had been causing tension returned to the ranch 2 days later, expecting weakness or confusion. Instead, the ranch owner stood firmly at the gate, not with anger, but with certainty. He told them the young woman was safe, welcome, and no longer afraid to speak if she chose to. She stood inside the yard, not hiding and not running. When one man asked sarcastically if she truly understood, she took a deep, slow breath, pressed her trembling hands together, and spoke 2 clear words. She said, "I hear." The men stared, surprised and confused. She did not curse, argue, or explain. She simply met their stare with quiet strength and let truth speak without a fight. They realized their threats held no power here and left, unable to shake a house that now held honesty instead of fear. With trouble gone, life at the ranch settled into a peaceful rhythm. She helped feed calves, cooked warm meals, learned new tasks, and practiced speaking little by little. She did not try rushing her voice because healing does not grow fast like weeds, but rises slow like sunrise over the valley. The ranch owner built her a small wooden box to store her slate and chalk, not because she would hide words again, but because he wanted her to keep them as memory of where courage began. Rumors in town changed too. At first people repeated that the silent girl was not really silent, but as weeks passed, stories shifted toward respect. Some praised the ranch owner for showing patience, others never bothered to offer. Others admired how she faced the world again with steady heart. The officer eventually returned not to question, but to offer support if needed. She thanked him with a small but clear voice, and he rode away smiling. One afternoon, while she sat near the fence brushing a young colt, the ranch owner walked over and handed her a small folded paper. She opened it and found simple words written by his hand. It said she was not a responsibility, but a blessing that changed his quiet life. She turned to him with tears not of fear, but of deep gratitude. For the first time since she arrived, she spoke a full sentence, soft but clear. She said, "Thank you for seeing me, not what others claimed I was." He did not answer with words. He placed his hand gently over hers, offering silent promise. Seasons turned and grass changed color, but their bond only grew stronger. She learned to ride horses with calm grace, and he taught her how to guide cattle across the pasture. She started speaking more often, little conversations every evening by the fire, telling him her dreams and even laughing quietly at times. The sound of her laughter became his favorite music, something he had not known he needed. One evening, while stars shined bright like silver dust, they sat outside watching the horizon. He told her she never had to pretend to be less than she was again. She looked at him with steady gaze and said she would never have found her voice without his kindness. She placed her hand on his, no longer trembling, and every quiet moment between them felt like a promise of tomorrow instead of a memory of fear. In time, people in town no longer spoke of her as the girl nobody wanted. They spoke of her as the strong woman who built a life on truth instead of fear, who learned to speak again even after the world tried to silence her. The ranch became not only her shelter but her beginning. The man who once believed silence was safer learned that love could heal even wounds that seemed buried forever. Together, they created a life built not from pity or obligation but from understanding and trust. She no longer hid her voice and he no longer hid his heart. Their story became a quiet reminder that sometimes the strongest people are not the loudest, but those who walk forward with steady courage even when the world doubts them. And so their days continued with open sky, honest words, gentle love, and a ranch that echoed not with silence but with hope.